met you and was like, this is different. This is going to be a game changer. And I was tired of looking at my friends and my colleagues where they're always on edge of this, whether it's cognitive overload or busyness overload, where it's just too much.
Hi, Kari. How's it going today?
I'm doing really well, thanks.
Great. Well, it's super appropriate that we're doing a podcast of the I.Liv Performance together, since we're doing so many of things together these days. So let's get into it. Let's start by taking a look at your journey. So can you tell us what led you to I.Liv, really, and made you finally say yes and jump in this year to join us officially?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, through a bit of my story, which I'll get into, this area became an incredibly important area for me around mental health and burnout. And when a really good friend of mine, Erica, introduced us and we started talking, I think within not even an hour, we automatically knew we were kindred spirits in a way about this incredibly important topic. So basically, to step back and explain a bit of my story. So I would say I'm a recovering high achiever, a recovering management consultant. So I did my chartered accounting designation. I worked at the Big Four. I went into industry for periods of time. And then my last I was a partner at Deloitte in their consulting group for the last 14 years. And I was thriving. I was doing incredibly well. I was being put into more leadership roles. I kind of described it as a high performance, high achiever rocket ship. And at the same time, I had family, I was married, I had 2 kids, and I was juggling and doing it all and thought I was fine. And then COVID hit. And with that, at the same time, I also was taken away. A leadership role was shifted and moved. And so about 50 to 70% of my day completely changed overnight. And I was trying to sort of figure out what I was going to do there, what was my next steps. There was lots of opportunities coming my way. However, as I said, that's when COVID hit. And, very quickly overnight realized that I was an extreme extrovert. I always knew that, but I loved being out and about, and I loved going to networking events, and I, just going to different classes and hanging out with friends. And that changed overnight. And I know this changed for a lot of people, but at the same time, I also realized that I was not in a happy marriage, and COVID did not break down my marriage. My marriage was broken before that, but I realized I hated being in my home. It wasn't comfortable anymore. And I fell into depression. And sorry, I'm so much better at not crying about this, but sometimes it comes up. And it's fine. I'm fine with crying about it. But it got to a point where I was suffocating and I fell into a depression. And I just couldn't get out of bed anymore. I started self-soothing through too many glasses of wine at night, and I was crying a lot. And my husband and I decided to officially separate. I literally woke up a Sunday morning and I called my boss and I just said, I can't do this. Like, I can't physically function anymore. And I started diving into everything. I read so many books. Listened to so many podcasts, and was trying to find a way to pull myself out of this. And I ended up actually taking off 6 months leave from Deloitte. And I honestly felt I was doing better. And I went back after 6 months. But this is the moment, is that I went back and I looked around me at all my colleagues and friends, and I could see the burnout in their eyes and how everyone was just hanging on by a thread. And what I realized through all my different research and all my reach outs to different people within my organization and other organizations is that there was no proactive way to help people. It was like you had to kind of burn out, pull yourself out of it, figure it out on your own, and then seek therapy and different things like that. There was no way to prevent it. And that's what I met you. And where I think between your and my journey, we found our way into an incredible solution or program. And I don't even want to say solution, but it was a way that we started to figure out how we could have a better balance
Mhm.
and not get to that state of overwhelm. And I did it through journaling and meditating and trying everything, including singing Tibetan bowls and all
Yeah.
sorts of stuff. But you then techified it. And that's what I always said was incredible. It's this program that has this incredible tech application that helps people then adopt these habits and these systems or programs that they can use every day. And
Mhm.
that was the difference for me. And that was an incredibly long story too, where
Mhm.
I met you and was like, this is different. This is going to be a game changer. And I was tired of looking at my friends and my colleagues where they're always on edge of this, whether it's cognitive overload or busyness overload, where it's just too much.
Yeah. No, thank you, Carrie, so much for sharing that. And I know I'm thrilled that others get to hear this story like I do and kind of can benefit from it because unfortunately so many of us have a version of that themselves, right? That's kind of what you and I bonded off. My version is different, but it's also powerful. And when you kind of go through it, you through it all, you kind of come out the other end, and then you see things differently. And
Yeah.
that's one of the connections that we had, and that was one of the reasons why I was like no brainer to bring Carrie as a part of our team. Was the fact that well, not only does you obviously bring your expertise and help us as a head of business development, but somebody who really deeply understands the problem we're solving, understands how organizations are so badly wanting to solve it, but are
Yeah.
not with the current approaches. I know you and I early bonded over the approach and what it really takes, and then our
Mhm.
desire to paint a different path forward for others. And we're united in mission to make in that drive to make an impact for others and really help others get to where we are today, not through a magic pill, but through a faster, shorter way that we can use yes, our technology, our benefit from all the best practices we put together, but save them some of the work we had to do to figure it all out for ourselves. That's what we're really looking to do together. When you think about that, and I know as a partner and CFO many times over, you've seen all kinds of different approaches in your
Mhm.
career and across many different organizations. So what is it particularly that you think makes the I Live method distinct or actually particularly powerful in your eyes?
I think what makes it different was, as you said, I've been to a lot of leadership
Mhm.
development programs, a lot of different trainings. And don't get me wrong, I love them. I think they're great.
Yes.
And I take away, lots of notes and I'm like, oh, this is a really great way to try and do something differently with business development or team engagement. But they're kind of a one and done. And that's what makes this so different is how you've now created the program that it's done at a minimum over a 6-week period, that it's done through a group and a group of individuals. Then you sort of learn the concept, you then try to adapt the concept, and then you connect again with each other. And it's figuring out those little habits. I'm going to keep going back to habits, but those little
Yeah.
things you can do in your day. Literally, it's 5 minutes at night, 5 minutes at the end of the day. And it's to reflect on what were you really trying to focus on, what went well, what didn't go well. But because it's done over a sort of slower period of time, that you actually find a way that you can adapt these practices or
Mhm.
this practice into your day. And I think everybody is a little bit different on how they take the pieces within this program and use them. And that's another thing, that what we're teaching is not rocket science. This is stuff we've all heard before, but it's figuring out a way to embed it within your day so then it becomes a consistent habit. And by these little things, you'll start to see the changes starting to happen. You'll see the patterns happening, and you'll see ways that you can change what you're doing and how you look at them.
Yeah, totally. I know. So those are one of the things. So some of the things we really align on. It's not one and done. We need effort and time to create these habits over periods of time. And then, but in the day, in the world where everything wants a silver bullet, wants things to be done, solutioned, and move on to the next. We're really facing an uphill battle that way to open up the need and the space for the solution to really address some of these challenges truly and deeply. Yeah, that's Perfect. So let's talk about a little bit how we are helping organizations see some
Mhm.
of that, see some of the need for this. And I know this process has been eye-opening for both of us, even the ones again having gone through an individual version of it, seeing many of our colleagues and friends, seeing their versions of it. But when you
Mhm.
look at when you zone out and you look at some of the big number, it's still really shocking, right? To look at it.
It's
Um,
shocking.
Shocking. That's right. And obviously we know we're doing a lot of educating on this. The data's out there, but we're not everybody's seeing it and living it, and we're spending a lot of time sharing this with people. So let's talk about one of the numbers that we like to talk about most.
Mhm.
It's the disengagement numbers that come from Gallup. So when
Yeah.
we first started talking about this last year, they published that it was 77% of the global workforce is disengaged.
Yeah.
And I started with that shocking number before sharing that this year it actually went up 2% to 79.
Yeah.
So what's your read on why this number is so high, why it's persisting and really growing so high,
Yeah.
such a big leap in a year? Uh,
Yeah. I mean, it was definitely, that is one of the numbers that completely shocked me. And when I say it out loud to people too, I'm like, 4 out of 5 people in the global workforce are disengaged. And that disengagement is actually broken into 2 pieces. So there's the loud quitting. So that is the people that are saying, I hate my
mhm,
job loudly, and to colleagues, to, people around them, I hate my job, or I want to leave. I'm actively looking. And that
mhm,
number's, I can't remember, it's probably around 24%. And the other part of that is the quiet quitting, which I know through the period of COVID, there was the great resignation, and then there was the quiet quitting. Like, we're coming up with all these new names of what's happening. It's the same thing. It's people are not happy at work.
mhm.
They're experiencing extreme cognitive overload of too much to do, too many emails, too many meetings. I think the average office worker, global workforce, like what we're talking about, they have 7 to 9 different channels of communication that's coming at them. Since COVID, the amount of meetings that the average worker attends or is required to go to has gone up percent. So even before, we were
Okay.
about too many emails, too many
Yeah.
channels, too many this, too many meetings. Well, all of that's just doubled and it's gotten worse. And that's why that number is not changing, is because we're just putting more and more demands on people to do more in their day and not having a good sense on what needs to be prioritized. And it's led to complete overwhelm. And what I sort of talk about on the spectrum is like stressed out and then overwhelmed to the point of burnout. And for me, burnout was not just around work. I have a famous line that I'm like, I didn't burn out from working too hard. I burned out from my life blowing up around me, is what happened. And recognizing that so many of us don't just have work demands, we have kid demands, we have family demands, we have parental demands, aging parent demands, like all of those things. And that's, again, one of the beautiful things that we've created within I.Liv is we look at all aspects. We don't just look at work. And I think that's why organizations, there's so many different things, what they're putting in place, they're spending more and more on benefits and wellness programs. But in my opinion, they are reactive. So
Mhm.
once someone says, hey, I need help, they're not proactive enough, and they are very individualized. So you leave it to someone to raise their hand and say, I'm not feeling so great, or I'm having some issues. And then they throw some more stuff at you. In my case, it was more readings, look at this stressed out management, tool that can help you. And I'm like, I'm too late. Like, you've lost me already. And that's what's different about what we're doing, is it's focused on a collective of a team with the cohorts. So learning from each other, realizing that you're not the only one that feels
Mhm.
this way. And also it's proactive. So it happens, helping people learn and understand before it gets too much so that they can figure out what works.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to some of the costs of the costs
Yeah.
of the disengagement, right? So you're totally right, and you shared some key reasons for that this day and age, which we must step back and really recognize and and address differently. But this is also when you think of, okay, disengagement. So why? So you say, okay, Kari, 79%. So let's say I recognize that 4 out of 5, and again, let's take a moment, 4 out of 5 of the global workforce is disengaged. What does that disengagement actually cost an organization? And you're a perfect person to ask about this. You talk to
Yeah,
it.
it's a great question. It's also a
Yeah,
really hard question to
really
answer
hard. Yes.
because there's so many aspects of it. So just the fact that someone is quiet quitting, that tends to lead to much higher absenteeism. So
Mhm.
someone that is on the edge of burnout or that sort of quiet quitting, I believe the stat is they're 80% more likely to call in sick and
Mhm.
use all their sick days. So all the costs that go into actually putting that benefit in place. Presenteeism. So the presenteeism, for everybody that knows that, it's I'm present, I'm on the job, but I'm actually not really in it. So I'm not as productive. And that's usually
Doing the bare minimum, maybe kind of
doing the
thing.
bare minimum. You kind of barely showing up, dialing
Mhm.
it in, those types of things often get said. So the cost of productivity is very significant. But the one number that with so many of these, there's direct costs and then there's indirect costs. So
Yeah.
you get into indirect costs of, reduced productivity, not as innovative, that type of thing. But the direct costs that I really like to focus on is that short-term and long-term disability. So 50% of short-term disability is related to mental health. So
Wow.
the cost of an organization, just to put those short-term disability benefits in, half of it is going to mental health. And that number does not change very much when you go to long term. And the issue with when someone goes from short term to long term is that it often takes a lot longer for someone to come off a physical health issue than actually a mental health issue. And it's because they're complex and it takes time to figure out and for someone to really pull themselves out of those types of health issues. So the costs are quite staggering. The one, I think the last stat that we saw probably about 6 months ago, it was the cost of burnout and productivity. And this was in the States. It ranged from $5,000 per sort of like junior employee all the way up to $21,000 for executive and senior leadership. So if you just take that number and say, I've got 1,000 people and you average about $12,000 per person per day,
You
that's a really big number.
get to really big numbers really fast. Of course,
Yeah.
I love having your view on this as a CFO because
Yeah.
I'm always because you got the CFOs are famous for wanting real numbers and
Yeah.
recognize real numbers. And the fact that you were talking about this is resonating with the C-suite like this level is this is the message that has to keep going out, that this is a real cost to your
It
organization.
has to. And
Mhm.
that's the tough thing is because like a lot of organizations are like, oh, we have these benefits and we're doing this and we have these,
Yeah.
we've now got, benefits for therapy for you and your entire family,
Yeah.
all these things. And I'm like, you're not getting to the root of the problem. You're
Mhm.
just like kind of painting a light little brush and saying, the famous one is, providing a yoga class is not going to help someone that feels that they have, that they're completely exhausted and overwhelmed with what they have to do in a day. That's just
Right.
now you're just giving them now you're making them feel guilty for not going to yoga because that's going to make them, it's going to make it all better.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
because as much as those things are helpful, and even I mentioned as a part of your own, recovery journey, there
yeah,
is room for meditation and breathing and yoga and all of those stuff. That's not the root cause. It doesn't address the root cause of the
exactly.
challenge that we're talking about.
Exactly.
Um, so moving on a little bit from the cost of all of this, um,
Mhm.
is so you mentioned there's lots of organizations are doing a lot, and that's totally true as well. As we talk to so many organizations, there's so many good intentions at the personal level and at the organizational and leadership level to be helpful, to help
Yeah.
others, and of course to deliver your the organizational outcomes that
Yeah.
the whole job is. But that's what we're also looking at. Like, how do we help companies go from intentional good intentions to
Mhm.
really this proactive embedded system that comes with what your true performance, leadership, and alignment.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I mean, I've kind of put it down to, and this didn't come from Kari Lockhart. This came from Kari Lockhart and a lot of reading. What I really found was important is to an extent what I started to do when I was at my previous organization is I started talking about this very loudly and I started sharing my own story. And I think more leaders need to do that. having these types of cohorts that we're creating, having leaders come to them and say, yeah, I had some issues here. I've suffered from this before, and tell their own story in an authentic way. And that's hard. It's really hard to do, because that by doing that, we start to reduce the stigma around this, that it's not. When I went through it, it was a lot of my own self-deprecating talk of like, everybody else seems to be able to handle this. Why can't I? And when you have someone, like a leader say, yeah, I had some problems or some issues too, but let's talk about it, that reduces the stigma, that then people can actually ask for help. The next thing, which I think is critical, and which is exactly where I.Liv fits in, is its education and training. So more people need to be aware of how these potential issues can show up with themselves and with your own your colleagues. And then the training is, it's like the education of this is how you can make these small changes, and to have the type of training that actually sticks. That's the difference with what we're doing, is that this training actually sticks.
Yeah, because there's ultimately really, there's no from good intentions. There's no silver bullet that somebody's waiting
No.
for. You have your company or your leadership team didn't buy it for you and share with you the secret magic of anybody that's doing it really well.
No.
It really is this system like of habits. So it's multiple habits, but then again, done consistently over time.
Yeah.
And it takes effort to develop those internally, and it certainly takes an investment to embed them as a part of the culture and way of operating within an organization.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's switch a little bit on the philosophy of I.Liv, because a lot of times when we hit this, we start talking about the trade-offs we're making between performance or the mysterious work-life balance that we're all chasing, and what is it? And there's lots of different ways to talk about it. And you and I have certainly had some really great conversations about this. I'd like to give people a sneak peek of, what we think about as as people who see ourselves as high performers. Is there, let's talk about the myth of choosing between high performance and work-life balance, and how can we reframe that choice, the reality of that choice, and then also how can we use that to our own advantage as we want to march forward in a way that keeps us performing at work and in life.
Yeah, I think you hit it dead on. Like, to me, it is a little bit of this myth of that you can have this high performance and also have this amazing work-life balance. It's like, no, there's choices. There really are choices. I think one of the things that really struck me when I first started using the app was that first stage of having a vision. And I didn't get it right at first. And I just picked a picture and it was like, this was it. But the fact that I had to open that every single day and I saw it, there was a number of times that I was like, is this really aligned with what you want to do? I was offered a full-time CFO gig, and that was where I was like, that's not really in this vision. So why are you even entertaining this? So having to make those choices, but it's, what is important to you and why, and reminding yourself of that regularly. And I think realizing that you don't have to perform at what everybody else's expectations are. You can have your own, and that's the best way to go. Again, like what I said before, none of this is rocket science, and I know we've all heard this before, but it's also recognizing how hard that is. Setting boundaries, and one of my favorite ones was, when someone said, you can juggle all the balls, you just need to know which ones you can drop. And I was like, I don't know, because I don't feel like I could drop any of them. So yeah, it's a bit of a myth. I don't think you can necessarily truly have that.
Right, but when you can feel like you're making those choices intentionally, right? So I choose today to double down on work so that I can really build up a career for myself, and I understand how that's aligning my long-term values, and how that will also, empower and support my family life, is very different than feeling like you have to do something in a certain moment. So
Exactly.
that's the part. And the other part I like to think of here, and I wonder, and I'm sure you agree too, but like is recognizes seasonality of life. So I think sometimes we get really caught in not every day has to be perfectly balanced. Like, do I do everything every day? No, there's some days that you work really hard. There's some days we're on vacation and get rest really hard, play with our kids or support our elderly parents, etc. But the work-life balance is really, we have to take a different lens to it. We're like, look at their life overall and really think about how each day is a slice of that and how seasons really add up and what the season is about.
Mhm.
And really intentionally recognizing that really helps us.
Yeah.
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 Um, so yeah, and I love there's a huge part of and I noticed the thread that you keep talking about is this proactivity. So starting to build the performance mindset before they get, employees and team members get promoted. So we're
Yeah.
starting before they get squeezed in life, which obviously a lot of data shows happens mid-career, right? Where we are
Mhm.
starting to have families or have the other, family responsibility, life responsibility hit us. So just want to give you a chance to underscore or ask, more about the idea of proactively supporting versus reactive support and how important that has become in today's world of just demands on us.
Yeah. I mean, I would describe it as, it was interesting when I did one of the very first, when I did the private cohort with you. And it was interesting talking to one of my friends who is, she's still a partner at Deloitte. And about probably 3 sessions in, and we were talking, she was like, every single manager should get this training. And because as we started discussing it, this is a life skill. It's not just about time management. It's about managing your priorities at work and at home. It's all of those things. And there's different pieces we have through calendars and to-do lists. But this is like helping you take the step back and being, God, some of these things sound so cliche when I say them, but it's like
Yeah.
you being in charge of it. You saying this is what I want to intend to do more of, and then choosing to do it. Hence the reason why I love intentional living. It's such a great way to put it, is so that you can be proactive about what you want to do and not just being reactive to your inbox and your calendar and all of that. So
Yeah. And considering the pace of change and is so outstripping ultimately human capability, it's become this critical skill set. Um, that's one of my favorite things when some of the participants come back and say this should be taught at school. And it
yeah.
makes me think of other skills that we recognize are not taught at school, but are so critical to our
Mhm.
success. So for example, if you say, okay, like personal finance, is not something
Yeah.
skill set that's taught in school. And we've come to kind of realize, no, it's so needed, right? And the idea the other day, I was on a panel a couple of weeks ago. I was on a panel. Somebody brought out the idea that entrepreneurship is really not being taught at school.
Yeah.
So in Canada, actually, we're sometimes behind in some of the entrepreneurship. We should really teach it. And then I would love to now add that intentional living. That's kind of what makes me think is not taught at school, and it's
Yeah.
become it's such a critical set of skills for today's world. Well, it was so nice to talk to you and get to hear some of your, personal thoughts behind the methodology and what we're doing in the market. Let me just kind of give, the last kind of wrap up for the, wrap up question. What's a key message that you really want our listeners to walk away from?
Probably not just one. You probably,
Yeah.
well, you know me, but now the listeners are starting to get to know me. I can talk a bit. So I think we've talked on one just recently, but the proactiveness. I think that
Mhm.
this is the proactiveness of this. I think the simplicity, but arming yourself with the right tools that you can make this a consistent habit. For me, was critical. And yeah, I think these little changes that you make, as I said, 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes at night, they were a game changer to me. Recognizing that was the big one for me, is that no one really, there's no silver bullet out there. There's no magic pill. And I found that really interesting when I started talking about this a lot more openly. The amount of people that would, reach out to me through DMing me, texting me, whatever it was. And they're like, how do you know you were close to burnout? What did you feel? And what did you do? And you can tell they're looking for that like, I just meditated every morning and then that fixed it all. And
Mhm.
it's not. And this is something that can really help you uncover what those are, those little things that will make a difference for you. And yeah, I don't know. The last message I always want to say to people is you're not alone. No matter what you see the person that seems to have it all together and that is handling it, they are not, because they've come to me after talks almost in tears and said, thank you for seeing me. So
that's a good one. That's actually a really great one to leave us off on, because I also noticed that as a really big common thread. We see others having figured it all out, and then we catastrophize our own situation and can drive some of that negative thinking, which just makes it worse for ourselves. But the idea that we all have a version of this that's a challenge in our life, and there is an approach that can be helpful, and it's all little changes, but then amplified over time is really the key to success. If we had a really sexy little mystery box to sell, it would probably be easier for human nature, but ultimately it's not. So we get to unpack this over many different episodes and many different content sharing, because it really is about this progress done consistently over time. So that's what we'll be doing this. That's why we'll be talking about this for weeks and months and years, hopefully, to come.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kari, for the discussion today.
Thanks.
To be continued.
All the time.
Totally.